Hello again, everyone. Welcome back. This is Jim, and this is Ray's Game Fully, my channel where I talk about older aspects of Dungeons & Dragons. This is my second video in a series that I'm doing on the D&D game world of Mystara. In my first video, I talked about how Mystara was first presented to gamers via the basic and expert rulebooks, and how a map from the expert rulebooks gave rise to a series of supplements called Gazetteers that described regions of the game world. In this video today, I'm going to talk about the first of these Gazetteers in much more detail. If you're familiar with the Gazetteer, I hope this brings back some fond memories for you. If you're not familiar with the Gazetteer, hopefully this video will help you to use it in your own campaign. But before I get into the Gazetteer itself, I just want to mention a couple of things about the Gazetteers as a whole. In the original Dungeons & Dragons game, the adventures were very site-based. The adventure would start, you would be in front of a dungeon or in front of a cave. You would go in, explore it, defeat monsters, get your treasure, and then take it back to town and sell it and heal up. And then in the next adventure, you would be once again in front of the cave or in front of the main gate. The adventure was very, very focused on the site by itself. The Gazetteers that came out changed that by describing the world in between the sites, kind of painted it in, so to speak. And these were great additions to the game for both players and DMs. As a player, the Gazetteers provided details that allowed you to customize your character in unique ways. It gave you all kinds of great information for backstories. And one really cool thing that the Gazetteers did was it allowed you to have a multinational flavor to something that was traditionally based on Western European culture. As a dungeon master, the Gazetteers provided tons of lore, history, and NPCs that as a DM, I was very happy to use in my adventures. The great thing about the Gazetteers for a DM too is that they're presented in a simple, concise format that really gave me an advantage when I wanted to describe a foreign land or even a single person from that land. By learning about the nations on the world of Mystara, it helped me as a dungeon master in case I needed to describe a Glantrian wizard, or a merchant from Daroken, or a water elf from Minrathod. All right, well, with that second introduction, let's get right into the Gazetteer itself. I'm going to be talking today about Gazetteer 1, the Grand Duchy of Karameikos, written by Aaron Alston. The Gazetteers shared a basic format, which was very, very helpful. It came with a cover, and the cover art on the Gazetteers was done by Clyde Caldwell, always amazing art. The inside of the cover typically had maps or drawings of things that were relevant to the nation that they were discussing. In the case of the Grand Duchy, the inside cover had some drawings of parts of the Duke's capital city. This here is a drawing of Mirror Bay and the fortifications surrounding it. And the bay is really something very important to the Duke and to the Duchy. It allows a safe environment for merchant trade. It allows for a protected base for his navies. And the bay plays a prominent role in the Duke's overall ruling strategy. Another thing that was part of the Gazetteers were large fold-out paper maps. There's actually two examples of them on the wall behind me from different Gazetteers. With Karameikos, the paper map that was included in the Gazetteer showed several great things. This here is a map of the Duke's capital city, Specularum. You can see Mirror Bay on the right from the previous drawing, and on the left side of the map you can see the Duke's castle. The maps of the cities and towns in the Gazetteers shared a standard format in that they were done in this colorful block pattern. And there was a theme from map to map in that the light pinkish areas, purplish areas were kind of the noble residences, the higher ends of society dwellings, and the yellowish brown colors were sort of the lower income, poorer sections of town, and the various colors representing different things. Another great map that came in the Karameikos set was a map of Karameikos itself. Now, this is a wonderful map. It's very reminiscent of the map from the Expert Rulebook, if you guys remember that. But just to be in color and to be a hex map as well was very, very helpful as a dungeon master. The great thing about the color shading here is it's very easy to determine what is a grassland versus a forest versus swamp or hills or mountains. The map did a wonderful job of showing you cities, towns, castles. It named the rivers, it showed you the oceans and the borders of the kingdom. Now, before I talk about the Gazetteer booklets themselves that were included in the package, I want to just give you a sense of what is happening in Karameikos. I want to kind of give you a flavor of what Karameikos is all about. So as a nation, Karameikos is wonderfully underdeveloped. It's a great mixture of civilized lands and monster-infested wilderness. Now this made a lot of sense, since most basic level adventures involve leaving a civilized area to go to a dangerous area to explore caves and ruins, and then returning to that safe area to rest and heal. And the way that Karameikos was designed is perfect for that. Now the natives of the area are humans. They call themselves Traladarans, and they've named their land Traladara. They live in scattered villages, scattered towns here and there. They're not unified in a political sense, but they're just kind of independent, small little settlements. Recently, other humans have arrived from the nearby Empire of Thyatis, led by Duke Stefan Karameikos. He arrived with his armies, his navies, knights, wizards, priests, engineers, and hundreds of workers. They came in and they conquered the capital city of Specularum, fortified it, and they've set about building baronies, fortified castles up and down the center of the country in order to bring it under control and civilize it. The intent of all this varies greatly depending on how you want to run your campaign. The Duke is always portrayed in a positive way. He's portrayed as a fair man, an honest man, very, very just. But if you wanted to put a different spin on that as a dungeon master, you could. If you wanted to make him more tyrannical or more of a colonial overlord, that would definitely work as well. There's a lot of tension in the country in regards to the new ways versus the old ways, and I'll get to that when I talk about the Dungeon Master's book. There are demi-humans in Karameikos as well. Elves live in the central forests. There are gnomes living in the hills and in the mountains. There are dwarves and halflings here as well. There's not a particular settlement or center for them to live in, but they are scattered here and there across Karameikos. If you are a fan of history, the flavor of Karameikos definitely is reminiscent of Rome invading Gaul or the Byzantine Empire conquering the Balkans. All right, so now that we have a little bit of an idea about what's happening in Karameikos, what it feels like to be in Karameikos, we'll talk about the Gazetteer booklets themselves. Gazetteers either came with 2 booklets, one for players, one for dungeon masters, or one booklet that was divided into 2 parts. In the case of Karameikos, it was one booklet divided into 2 parts. So we'll start with the player section. Now, I'm not going to go page by page and show you everything that was included in the Gazetteer. PDF files do exist online. You should be able to find them if you're interested in reading about them or incorporating them into your own campaign. But I've decided to just screenshot a few high points of the Gazetteer to talk about with you. I know the shot is not very, very big. The print might be a little bit small, but I'm just going to go over what I consider to be the highlights of the section. So first and foremost, with the player's book, it talks about the different character backgrounds that are available to characters who live in Karameikos. It talks about, is your character's family a Trollodaran? Are they a Thaiatian? And it provides backstory elements depending on which background you choose. The second great thing about the player's guide is it talks about local customs, ceremonies, and social status. There are different tiers, castes to Karameikian society, and it talks about, if you wish, like how much of that goes into your character's backstory. Were you a farmer? Were you a noble? Did you come over from Thaiatis with the Duke to discover and civilize a new land? So there's lots of different options here, depending on how you want to set up your character's backstory. I think, most importantly, out of the player's book in the Karameikos Gazetteer, was the concept of skills. Skills were, at the time, a new addition to the game that gave your character skills that they could use in various situations that weren't present before this. Skills that allowed you to have a profession, such as a blacksmith or a barrel maker or a leather worker. Skills allowed you to draw a sword at the slightest noise to try to avoid the effects of surprise. Skills that allowed you to recognize and use herbs and plants as natural medicine. All these different things that helped you customize your character and individualize your character in a way that hadn't been seen before in basic Dungeons & Dragons. This section of the player's book goes over some of the skills that a Karameikian character would possess, and it gives you some to choose from, and it also outlines the rules for skill use in general. How many you start with, when do you get more, etc. The second and larger part of the Gazetteer was the Dungeon Master's Guide. The first part of the Dungeon Master's section was an extensive history of the area, which is kind of the story I summed up for you guys a short while ago. The Gazetteers always talked about the history and then presented it in a summary timeline, which was great. The timeline is standardized on a calendar based on the Empire of Thaiatis, so they'll refer to it as the Thaiatian calendar. It lists important activities and the dates they occurred. And this was great too, as you ran a campaign and your characters wandered around from nation to nation. It gave you some extra information and freedom to talk about events. If you knew that such and such battle took place in the year 600 in Karameikos, and then they went to a nearby nation and they started talking about events from the year 600, you could kind of relate it to the battle that took place back in Karameikos. The timeline was just a really, really great tool for Dungeon Masters to use. Another large section of the book was politics in Karameikos. And this kind of expands further on what I mentioned already. Politics are a tricky thing in Karameikos. You've got the newcomers with the Duke and his retainers and his new ways of doing things versus the old ways of doing things that have been in Karameikos for centuries. So the politics section talks about the Duke and his laws that he's imposed upon the country. For example, some towns will have weapon carrying restrictions. You can't carry a weapon in public larger than a dagger. Some towns and cities will have restrictions on spell casting. You can't cast spells in certain towns unless you're accompanied by someone, a member of the Magic Users Guild. It also talks about political rivalries. Obviously, when the Duke arrived, he upset the apple cart, so to speak, and there are local families that aren't too keen on what he's doing and what he's trying to do. So the section did a really good job of explaining different families and political intrigue, and you didn't have to include all of it in your game. If you wanted to go down that route and you wanted to draw the characters into some type of espionage, or if you wanted to draw them into some type of assassination plot, you could do it here. It gave the Dungeon Master a lot of tools to kind of set up adventures involving the politics of the country. There was also a very large section on society. This dealt with the caste system that I mentioned earlier. whether you were a free man or a serf, or you could be a lord or a knight, and what those things entailed and what their requirements were to get to those castes, what responsibilities those nobles or what those knights had. It also talked about different types of opportunities for priests or for magic users within the structure of Karameikian society. The Gazetteer also had these short little diagrams and pictures, which were very, very cool. In this case, this page shows a map of a typical small tavern. In case your characters are just wandering through the countryside, it's late in the session, you want to just throw them into a tavern, and it provided a shortcut for that by giving you a little typical tavern. This page also contains information on the Duke's military might, which was really, really helpful if you decided to go down more of a large-scale war path with your campaign. The society section also contained this great page. I love this page. It talks about different standards or shields, heralds, if you will, for various groups within the duchy. This was great, just an added sense of artwork to flesh out the area. And it also brought up this calendar, which I touched on earlier. The calendar was great. It, again, was it came with Karameikos from Thyatis, so it's called the Thyacian calendar. And it's pretty standardized throughout the Gazetteers. It talks about holidays. The names of the days in the week are Thyacian in general. But it talks about holidays, which is great. If you're that type of dungeon master who's very, very strict with the timekeeping, tracking days and weeks and months, you can actually use the calendar to pinpoint an exact date that you're adventuring on. So instead of just wandering into a city and saying it's just another day, you could consult the calendar and say, oh wow, it's New Year's Day. There's probably things going on, there's probably parties happening. And that was a real neat thing. It gave dungeon masters yet another tool to just add adventure hooks or to add flavor to their campaign. There's a section here on the economy. Talks about how coins are minted. It talks about mercantile trade, things like that, if you were so inclined to include those details in your campaign. And then there's a large section on the communities, which was basically just a city by city, town by town description of the locations within the duchy and who's in charge of them, what's happening there, local troubles or local stories that could be used as adventure hooks. I'm not going to go through all of them. Obviously here on the first page it talks about Specularum, which is the capital city of the Duke. There's a large section on that. But I do want to just talk about one particular town that's in the Gazetteer. It's called Threshold. In the expert rulebook, Threshold is painted as the hometown for the player characters. And it's kind of put together and served up on a platter for you to have Threshold be your character's starting point. And it's a great town. It's a logging community up in the mountains at the head of a river. If you can look at the map, there's an old town inside the inner wall. There's a new town enclosed within the second wall. There's a home for the Baron nearby, who's a high-level cleric, if that's something that the characters need. And there's paths north and south that lead up into the mountains and back into the Duke's lands, respectively. So Threshold was a great place to be from. It had just about all the things that you would need. It had inns, it had blacksmiths, it had guilds that you could talk to and join if necessary. But it was just such a great launching off point for many campaigns, and it was presented as a hometown. Obviously, you needn't use it as a hometown if your campaign was better off starting somewhere else, but it was nice to have the option of a ready-made hometown. The next section of the Gazetteer described the characters and the NPCs involved in the nation. And it describes them, each character section starts with a history of the character, what they're doing, how they got here. It gives DMing notes, it gives combat statistics and powers and abilities in case they need to enter into combat. I'm not going to talk about all of them individually. I'm going to just show you some of the cool artwork that was involved. The first section of the character section reasonably starts with the Duke. This is Duke Stefan Karameikos and his wife and his 3 children. Another great thing that the Karameikos Gazetteer did was it introduced a lot of ambassadors. So Karameikos is a new nation. They're trying to establish themselves on the international scene, and they've invited lots of ambassadors to the city of Specularum to formalize relations, establish trades and treaties and things like that. And the fact that there were ambassadors present in the city really gave a lot of adventure hooks to the DM, if that's something that you wanted to do. If you, as a dungeon master, wanted to send your characters beyond Karameikos, and perhaps you wanted to go to another land, you could very easily have them bump into an ambassador or one of their staff, and they could get on friendly terms and discuss a pressing matter back home, and it was a great launching point to other parts of the world. It also added another touch of that international flavor that I talked about. There were many, many different types of ambassadors. Perhaps if your campaign didn't have a cleric, or if it didn't have an elf, you could meet one in the city of Specularum. Then maybe they were part of an ambassador's entourage, and it would just lead to all kinds of great stories and adventures down the line. This picture here illustrates the 2 priesthoods, clergy that are present in Karameikos. The old religion of the Traldarans and the new religion imported from the Phaeacian Empire. There is a lot of great stuff to do with the 2 priesthoods. Instead of just being a cleric and just playing a cleric that, the standard way, you could choose to be from the old religion or the new religion. It would give you a totally different backstory. It would give you a different purpose in Karameikos. Are you trying to preserve the old ways? Are you trying to encourage people to adopt the new ways? There was actually a military wing of the new priesthood, an order of clerics that were focused more on military pursuits, called the Order of the Griffin. And here we see a picture of the Baron of Threshold and his daughter, who are both, well, he's a cleric proper, and she's a member of the Order of the Griffin, and it just gave another choice to clerical characters. You could be more of a priestly character if you wanted to be more of a military fighting type cleric. The Order of the Griffin was a great way to introduce you to that and give you that social structure of a lawful church. It was really, really, really cool. And the best for last. So this is Baron von Hendrix and his court magician, Bargle the Infamous. Baron von Hendrix is the universal bad guy of the setting. He's the antagonist who is the puppet master. He's got his hands on the strings of every little thing that's happening. He's got agents and spies spread across the land. He's involved in a slave trade. He abducts people. He does all kinds of bad things. He hires monsters as guards, even though the Duke has strictly forbidden this. And he's just the evil bad guy who's a great, great character to use for many, many different things. Bargle is probably the highest level evil magic user in Karameikos. I think he's around 14th level, and he serves as a great behind-the-scenes bad guy as well. If you are in Karameikos and you're higher level, if you're up to, say, 13th, 14th, 15th level, and you're deciding to use the companion rules for the first time, I talked about the companion rules in my Beck Me video. There's actually a scenario where the Duke has had it with his cousin. He's fed up with the Baron, and they actually go to open war. There's actually a Karameikan civil war between Baron von Hendrix and the Duke, and you can play it all out with a war machine. But just a great, great character. The last section of the Dungeon Master's book describes adventure hooks. I want to say there's about 18 of them. Some of them are for low-level adventurers, some of them are for mid, some of them are for higher-level adventurers. And they're just short little adventure ideas that can propel your characters into a side quest, or it can propel them into another adventure. They can be expanded to become a standalone adventure. The section also talks about the published adventures. In the B series that I talked about in my other video, They are, for the most part, set in Karameikos, and it talks about them and maybe how to include certain political aspects into those adventures. It also leaves a lot of room for your own adventures. If you're a dungeon master who's created dungeons or created your own wilderness adventures, there's plenty of room in Karameikos to do that, based on the fact that most of the country is just a wilderness overrun with monsters. So plenty of opportunities for adventure, whether they're published or self-designed. That is it. That is a summary of the content of the Grand Duchy of Karameikos. It's one of my favorite settings. It is a great place to launch a campaign. It's a great place to play basic, low-level Dungeons and Dragons for the reasons I described. And it's just got a fond place in my heart. I love it very, very much. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like it, please like it. If you love it, please subscribe. I've got more videos on the way, but that's it for this one. Thank you again for watching, and please be kind to your fellow players.